The next guy that I have on the list, at least, is Bo Nix. I've heard a decent amount of chatter about Bo Nix to Denver, and I wonder if that might be a little bit of process of elimination. I know that Sean Payton has dug in a bit, so we will see if that potentially shakes out. But I wonder with Bo Nix whether 12th overall is too high for him. So I ask you, what do you think? Do you think, just baseline, do you think Bo Nix is worth the 12th overall pick if the Broncos decide to do so?
No, man. I mean, look, I think he had a really nice last couple of years at Oregon, and this past year, from a completion percentage standpoint, obviously was extremely impressive and everything like that. But that was also kind of a product of that offense as well, right? Look, he was in college for 5 years. It honestly felt like longer. He kind of pulled
Yeah,
like a Van Wilder
totally.
situation there. But look, man, I just when I think about like a first half of the first round pick, Bo Nix is not typically a guy that comes to mind. I think that would be Sean Payton trying to kind of force the issue a little bit and just saying, look, I don't want to go forward with Jared Stidham, and maybe a bit of a flag plant, but look, that to me would be an incredibly questionable flag plant. I know, they traded for Sean Payton and he got that big contract, so maybe he's got more wiggle room than most, but like, I don't know, man. I have a tough time seeing kind of that situation go well. Where are you at on somebody like Bo Nix and kind of going at 12?
Yeah, so I don't think he's worth the draft capital, but I honestly think I could kind of see the situation going well for Bo Nix specifically. Like, I think you're right. Like, the hard part is the eval, because those first 3 years at Auburn, it was ultra low passing volume. I was mentioning this on the show that I had with Dino Joe. Shout out that, like, from me, like, I'm obviously Canadian, so a little bit detached from the college football scene as you guys are down there. But even I would see, like, Bo Nix was kind of like the butt of jokes in his
Yeah.
Auburn tenure, and people were shitting on him, like laughing at him being a first round quarterback. And then he goes to Oregon, which is like one of the most conducive to success offenses that you could ever
Yeah.
have. So it's like, what guy is he, right? I do like the improvement, obviously, in that completion percentage. Adjusted completion percentages over 82% each of the last 2 years is absolutely outrageous. So I think he was a bit of an accuracy king. I think the wild card is Sean Payton, though, because if we look at his previous offenses, that quick timing, dump offs to the running back, dump offs to the tight end, really like utilize your weapons in a bit of a creative way. Like, I think Bo Nix could kind of fit into that, right? Like, let him dink and dunk it a little bit. He doesn't
Yeah.
have to put the
Oh
team
yeah.
on his back. But it's just like, that's a lot of dominoes that need to kind of fall. And that's the assumption of Sean Payton being rational as a coach. And so, to your point, I kind of like, I could see it go well, but I think I lean towards that it probably doesn't. And yeah, it's crazy because those other guys are going to fly off the board and Denver's going to feel like they have to. And then there's going to be a bunch of trickle
Yeah.
down effect from there. Right. And so it feels kind of wild to see Bo Nix up going that high. But if we do say that he does go there, because I think it's actually a real possibility, maybe they trade back and still take him or something like that. But I think that might be a little bit dicey if they're convicted on taking him. But what do you think a guy like Bo Nix does for a Cortland Sutton? Maybe for one of the Undroppables team favorite breakout candidates, Marvin Mims, also
Yeah.
a UN score darling.
Yeah.
Just what do you see with him as that distributor who you might have questions in the profile in, if you supplant him in with Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, Javonte, a little bit of Greg Dulcich, and then of course Sean Payton?
Yeah, so I mean, I do want to touch on the fact that look, I kind of agree with you that I do think he would be a good fit with Sean Payton. It's just at that spot, right? And
Yeah.
that's where you kind of brought up a good point where maybe they feel like they get pigeonholed into taking him at 12, right? Because like I do see a world where like, look, quick timing, I'm not like the ultimate Drew Brees light, right? Like just get the ball out, be super
Mm-hmm.
accurate. Um, that's I would worry like about like Cortland Sutton and driving the ball downfield, because one of
Yeah.
the things that Cortland Sutton has actually done like surprisingly well, the last 2 years here. I was looking at a few things for average depth of target the last few days, and when you look at kind of the way the receivers operated on a depth of target of 10 to 19 yards, right? Cortland Sutton had the fourth highest yards per route run out of any wide receiver, only behind Jefferson, Ayuk, and Olave, right? And like
Wow.
that's on 140 plus routes over the last 2 years with an average
Man.
depth of target of 10 to 19 yards, right? So like look, if Bo Nix can live in there, sure, okay, then there's some optimism. I do think a lot of the production that we liked from Cortland Sutton last year was some of that jump ball stuff, those deeper touchdowns. I think he did have kind of a boom touchdown year.
Mhm.
That's the sort of thing I would worry about not being able to replicate. But look, if Sean Payton would have him kind of operating in that intermediate area with some of the things that I have surprisingly seen from Sutton, I would say there's a little bit of optimism there.
Totally. I'm like just looking at the historical Sean Payton offenses, I grew a little bit optimistic as well because yeah, Drew Brees wasn't a cannon arm quarterback necessarily, but he had alpha wide receivers all going all the way back to Marcus Colston. Jimmy Graham to a degree was essentially just a
Yep.
big ass wide receiver playing tight end. Brandon Cooks had some big
Yep.
years, and then of course Michael Thomas has the target record in a Sean Payton offense. So I think all that stuff was kind of encouraging. I'm not saying that Bo Nix is Drew Brees by any means, but it's just easy
No.
to kind of take a look at that and see what those successful
Yeah.
Sean Payton offenses have been like as to whether he can do that. I think it can be fine for Cortland Sutton because I think he's going to be heavily targeted to where he is held up by that. But to your point, I think it's not going to be necessarily as efficient as we've seen him the last couple of years because Bo Nix isn't even Russell Wilson as far as downfield passing, right? So I think there's definitely a drop there, but I think if he can be heavily targeted in that 10 to 19 range, he can be just fine. That 19 plus range is where we're a little bit worried for sure. Like,
Yeah.
is Bo Nix going to be able to put it on him down there? I think what I came out with though was a little bit of hesitation on our guy Marvin Mims though, to be completely honest. If you look at all those wide receiver twos of Sean Payton offenses, this isn't the only factor. Of course, it's 2024 is a new time, but he hasn't really had many second receivers on his team produce unless they were like top tier talents. And I know we are very positive about how Marvin Mims can progress as a talent. But when we look at those guys who did produce for Sean Payton, we're looking at like a Brandon Cooks being second to Michael Thomas on the depth chart, or Marcus
Yep.
Colston being number one with Jimmy Graham being number two, different combinations of those guys. And I'm not so sure that Marvin Mims can ascend to the level of being that type of second fiddle, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think he's in the talent tier that Brandon Cooks was at that time. So I'm a little bit worried about that because the other guys, now none of them were necessarily as talented as Marvin Mims, but they're getting in that like 750 and 4 touchdown range with like 60 grabs and stuff like that. So I think Mims can be in the middle of that, but I would hesitate on planting my flag in him having a blow up now that they get a new quarterback, especially being that quarterback is potentially going to be Marvin or Bo Nix, and Marvin Mims needs to go downfield.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the way this plays out is, you know, in a scenario that works out for Mims, is he does try and become like Brandon Cooks light, right? Like the
Yeah.
kind of similar body styles and everything like that. But like, I was just looking back here, like as you were talking, like looking back at Brandon Cooks's rookie year, 10 games because he ended up getting hurt, but 550 yards in 10 games, right? So he's pacing for like just under 1,000 yards his rookie year, which, like, look, far cry from what we just saw to Marvin Mims, right? Like, obviously, some of that was situation last year with
Mhm.
some of the overlap with Jerry Jeudy, which we talked about last episode. But like, that would be like a major, major jump to kind of, and then you look at, what Cooks did the next essentially 5 years, right? 1,100,
Huge.
1,200, 1,100, 1,200, right? Like, so you're going from basically zero production his rookie year and then basically asking him to kind of take on something like that. That's where those reservations that you have about potentially what that looks like for Marvin Mims, I definitely understand it. The hope would be, look, he's got that great analytical profile. They traded up for him. Sean Payton's going to do everything
Yeah.
that in their power to kind of make that happen because, really outside of Cortland Sutton and Mims, yeah, they've got Dulcich. We'll see if he can stay on the field. Other than that, like, those are their passing game weapons, man. Like, yeah, you've got the
Yeah.
running backs coming out of the backfield, but like those concerns that you have for Marvin Mims, I do think are valid in that situation.
Yeah, like I just let him be versatile, like Brandon
Yeah.
Cooks was back then. Like, don't make
Yep.
him just that deep ball guy. Like, get him on some speed drags and some slants and shit like that. Just see what the guy can fucking do. And that's gonna play
Yep.
really nicely into Bo Nix's hand as well. So